At 40, I thought I'd made peace with my quiet routines. Morning coffee, a golden retriever named Gus, and a calendar dotted with dental cleanings. Then a familiar laugh from 3 decades ago cracked open the day. My high school crush, the boy I watched beneath Friday night lights, walked into my hardware store wearing time like a soft sweater. He said my name like a secret he'd kept safe, and suddenly the future felt young again, for both of us. If this story touches you, please like, subscribe, and share. Comment your second chance love tales. I read everything with gratitude always. He stood under the artificial sun of the aisle lights, staring at a wall of paint chips like he'd never seen color before. His hair was shorter, softer at the temples, that salt and pepper you don't notice until life has been kind and hard in equal measure. His shoulders were broader than they were back in 2002, but his grin was the same. That gentle lift on the left side that made you feel like you were being let in on something good. He turned when he heard my footsteps. "Daniel," he said, and my name came out a question and a memory and something else I didn't want to name yet. "Evan," I said, with a calm I didn't own. My palms hummed like a tuning fork. 30 years between then and now, and look at us. Both of us pretending we were just 2 neighbors in aisle 7, wondering which shade of blue belongs on a porch swing. We stood there a breath too long, and Gus, my graying retriever who naps behind the register like he's on staff, lifted his head and thumped his tail against the floor. I remembered, without trying, the way Evan's laugh used to float over the bleachers on Friday nights. How I sat 2 rows behind him and traced our names on a foam cup with my thumb. A secret ink that never reached paper. "What are you doing here?" I asked. It came out with more wonder than suspicion. I hadn't thought of him in months, and that felt like a betrayal. But the brain has to be practical. The heart, I suppose, never learned how. He rubbed the back of his neck. That same shy habit from a long time ago. "I'm back for a while. My sister's moving Mom into an assisted living place over in Cedar Pines. I'm helping sell the house, and you know, I needed a place that feels like a place, if that makes sense." It did. Our town was like that. Slow streets with names you could remember. A diner with orange vinyl booths. A park where children learned to ride scooters in wide circles and older folks held hands under the sycamores when the afternoons cooled off. "You've got good timing." I gestured to the paint. "We're running a sale, and Gus is giving out free advice if you scratch behind his ears." He laughed then, and time folded, just slightly. "I could use both." He looked up at the wall of colors as if he were searching for a lost summer. "What would you pick for a front door you want people to recognize from the end of the street?" I climbed the little rolling ladder and pulled down a card. Red. Not fire truck red. Something that looks like it's been keeping stories behind it for years. His eyes roamed the names. "Summer Dawn," he read off the card. "You always were good with colors." It startled me, the present tense. "You always were." As if that boy who stayed late to repaint the theater sets with me, watching me as much as the paint, might still be in there. "You remember the set designs?" I said. "I remember carrying boards in from behind the gym and you making them look like old barns with a sponge and 2 shades of brown," he said. I remember thinking that was some kind of magic. He brought the paint to the register, and I rang him up while Gus leaned into his hip like he'd known him all his life. Evan scratched the soft place under Gus's collar and said, "Hey, bud," as if he needed a companion to steady his voice. He looked up at me. "Do you still—" He paused, and there was a flicker of the boy who used to take too long to tell you the important part. "Do you still go to that diner on Main? The one with the pecan pie that could set a broken heart straight?" "Every Wednesday," I said. "Tonight's Wednesday. Could I join you?" he asked, careful, like he didn't want to step on a fragile floor. "You could," I said, and smiled because I couldn't help it. 6:30. I sit in the corner near the pie case because I like to watch all the slices argue with each other. He laughed again. "Still a poet," he said. He left with his paint and a tied twine handle around the bag, and I watched him through the window as he lifted the can into the bed of a pickup that had seen better years and honest work. He paused when he thought no one was looking and looked up at the hardware store sign like he was trying to place me in the timeline of his own life. At 6:30, the diner smelled like butter and coffee, and 27 conversations were happening at once. I sat in my usual spot, hands wrapped around a glass of water so cold it sweated through the napkin, and told myself I would not stare at the door. I stared at the door. He walked in 10 minutes late and looked around like people do when they're looking for a story they aren't sure they deserve to be part of. When he spotted me, his face softened. He slid into the booth and said, "I don't think I've eaten here since the seniors put on their car parade 20 years ago." "They still do it," I said. "Notice how time has a sense of humor? I figured if I stayed away long enough, the jokes would get old," he said, and then winced. "That came out wrong." "It came out human," I said. "So how's your mom?" "Tired. Her favorite chair looks bigger around her now, but she's still got opinions about the hospital drama she watches. She told a nurse last week that nobody on earth is that handsome and that troubled at the same time." He shook his head, smiling with fond exasperation. "She's okay. It's the in-between that's hard." I told him about my dad, how he'd turned soft as sugar when he forgot the names of tools but remembered the words to my mother's favorite song. How losing someone comes in little losses first, folded into afternoons. We didn't talk about high school, not right away. It hung in the air like a picture crooked on the wall. A little weight in the corner of the room. We ordered meatloaf and green beans and mashed potatoes, because that's what you do when you need grounding, and we shared a slice of pecan pie because it seemed greedy to each have one. And pie is generous by nature. We laughed about the morning announcements. The principal who always said y'all like he was casting a net over us and tugging us close. Finally, he said, "I used to park over by the stadium after practice and sit on the hood with the engine ticking down and wish I could drive away." He looked up at me, not away, and I noticed the fine lines at the corners of his eyes were not from worry but from sunlight and laughter. "I'd see you sometimes walking across the field with paint on your jeans." "Let me guess," I said. "Sienna and a little ultramarine," he grinned. "Probably." "I wanted to ask what you were making." I wanted to talk. "I don't know why I never—" He trailed off, and there was a small boy in his voice for a second, the one who didn't want to drop anything fragile. "I do," I said gently. We were 18. We were in a place where the radio stations changed, but not much else. I was so busy learning to be invisible that I nearly disappeared. You were busy being everything to everyone. We were kids. He looked down at his hands, turning the napkin into a coil. "I brought my son back here once when he was little," he said, and watched me absorb that. "He's in college now. His mom and I, we were young and we were better friends than lovers. I didn't know how to be honest then. It took years, but we did the good work of raising a good person. I let it settle between us, that piece of his life I didn't know." "You have a son," I said, and it felt like something to respect. "What's his name?" "Caleb," he said with a father's softened pride. "Plays guitar. Sends me songs. He tells me when I need to trim my beard and when I should be kinder to myself." "Smart kid," I said, and I meant it. We paid the check, and outside the diner the sun was lowering itself with ceremony behind the post office. The cicadas were starting up, that summer orchestra you only notice when you stop talking. We walked along Main Street without touching, the way you do when old habits still hold you like a school blazer you outgrew but kept anyway in the back of the closet. When we reached the park, Gus and I's regular place, the benches were mostly empty. He sat, and I sat, and we watched a boy on a scooter draw wide circles like he was drawing something he couldn't say yet. Evan said, "I never thought I'd come back." "I always thought you would," I said, surprising myself. "I don't know why. Maybe because some people don't stay gone. They're tied up in the story of a place. Like the way the old theater has a smell that really just belongs to dust and velvet, but it feels like the past acting kind." He nodded. He took a breath. "Do you remember the night of the spring play? When they asked me to move the flats because the football guys were big, and I stayed late even though coach wanted me at practice?" "I remember," I said. I remembered the exact color of the blue we used on the sky flat, and how the gym light made everyone look golden. "You said I like this," under your breath. I pretended not to hear. "I wanted to touch the paint," he said, and then he laughed at himself, shook his head. "That sounds ridiculous." "But I did. I wanted to feel the thing you'd made. I wanted to feel what it was like to make something. I wanted to be near you. And then Jake walked in and my stomach turned inside out and I said something about burgers and took off, and I've thought about that night for 20 years like a page I never finished reading. I closed my eyes for a moment. I remembered writing a note on the back of a program that said, "I think you're braver than this," and never giving it to him. Somewhere maybe it's still tucked in a box with ticket stubs. I smiled, not for once at the past, but at the way memory gets gentler when you're kind to it. "Do you want to see the field?" I heard myself ask. "They changed the turf last year, but the bleachers are the same. They still creak like they're gossiping." We walked there, passing the drugstore, the mural of sunflowers a class painted years ago that the town never took down. Because why would you? The chain-link gate was open because our town trusted people like that. We climbed, slowly because both our knees had opinions now, and sat where his curly hair used to catch the stadium light like a halo I'd never have admitted to seeing. "It's smaller," he said, "or I'm bigger." "Both," I said, and we let the evening light tell stories across the track. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something folded small enough to hide on your palm. He opened it and handed it to me. It was a page torn from a spiral notebook, dated senior year, creased and thin from being unfolded and refolded. The handwriting was careful. It said, "I want to say thank you for making those sets, for making me want to look at things instead of just move through them, for being quiet and brave even when it looks like the opposite. This may be dumb, but if you ever want to drive out where the sky is big, I know a road." I held it like a relic from a church I'd once been afraid to walk into. "You wrote this," I said, as if the proof didn't sit trembling in my hand. "I wrote it," he said. "I never gave it to you. I put it in my wallet instead and took it to college and to my first apartment, and the only other person who's seen it is Caleb because he was helping me move once and he found it." He said, "Dad, you're allowed to want things." I told him I was practicing. I didn't know how to answer in a way the moment deserved, so I did the only thing I could think to do. I folded the note back the way it had been and put it in his hand. "Let's go find that road," I said. We drove out in his truck, the one that had a stubborn seatbelt and a dash that rattled on tight turns. Gus's head was between the seats because he didn't like to be left out. We took the two-lane highway out to where the radio stations fade to static and the soy fields reach like unrolled carpet toward a horizon that refuses to hurry. He pulled off near a fence line and cut the engine, and the quiet wrapped itself around us. We got out and leaned against the hood, the metal warm against our backs. And the sky did its big thing where it forgets it's supposed to be background and becomes the main event. "I used to come out here to think," he said, "or to not think. That sometimes felt like the same thing." "I used to go home and write plays that nobody read," I said with a smile that didn't ache. "I wrote a scene once where two boys sit on a truck and talk about leaving." "What did they say?" he asked. "They said," I recited from a memory I didn't know I still owned, "what if home is a person and not a place?" They said, "Maybe the person is you." They said, "I'm not ready to say that out loud." He adjusted so his shoulder was barely inching toward mine, just enough to let the electricity announce itself, but not enough to spark. "I'm ready," he said, with the quiet that comes when someone finally knows their own voice. "I want to try. I don't know what it looks like. I've got a mother whose boxes don't pack themselves, a son who calls from a music hall across the country, a job with flexible hours but solid responsibility. You've got a store and a dog and a life, but I know I want to sit next to you and figure it out." I looked at the sky, the sort of place you look when you need courage. "I want that too," I said. "We can go slow. We can go carefully. We can take off our shoes before walking on this." He laughed, and there it was again, that sound that made rooms larger. "I forgot how you talk," he said. "You make it feel like every step is an invitation. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to, not then." We stood there and let the night tuck itself around us. Gus leaned his head against my thigh, and thus the three of us made, briefly, a small, steady constellation. In the days that followed, we made a habit out of being honest. It sounds like a small miracle. It was. He'd swing by the store and stand at the counter while I untangled twine or rang up nails, and people would say, "Well, look who came home," and he would not flinch. We'd go to the diner on Wednesdays and order the special, meatloaf again because you don't abandon the classics lightly, and talk about everything. He told me about the first man he fell in love with, how it was more bravery than compatibility, but he owes him for the courage. I told him about the neighbor I dated for a while, a kind man whose grief was too loud for us to hear each other over. On Saturdays, we drove boxes to his mother's house, carefully sorting through the artifacts of a life. Time is a tender archivist, and so we were too. Her Christmas ornaments, the ones shaped like bells and apricots, were wrapped in tissue paper that had lived entire seasons in a bin marked holiday. We found a photo of Evan at 16 with his jersey stuck to his shoulder pads from sweat, his grin a little wild like it might run away. And I held it and said, "Look at him." And he said, "I know." Then quietly, "I want to tell him it turns out okay." We laughed when we found a recipe card written in his mother's block letters for something called hamburger surprise, and read the ingredients like poetry. We cried when we found the hospice brochure tucked under a stack of unpaid bills, the softness in his mother's script where she'd underlined family support. We did not break. We were older, so we knew how to wait for a feeling to pass through without tearing everything down. In the evenings, he taught me how to sand a door to the proper stubbornness. I showed him how to fix a leaky faucet with patience instead of force. Sometimes he'd bring his guitar and sit on my back steps and loosen a chord until it told him the truth. Gus would lie there and sigh, long-suffering, as if we were not the best company he'd had all day. One Sunday, we went to the old stadium. Not for a game, just because it was a place we both had learned how to measure ourselves against. The field was empty except for a couple of kids kicking a soccer ball and a man in a blue hat doing slow laps around the track. We sat on the lowest bleacher because knees. He ran his hand along the metal and said, "I never realized how many times I came here looking for permission." "Did you ever find it?" I asked. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe not. Maybe that's the thing nobody tells you. You get to give it to yourself." 40, I said. Feels like a passport stamp, doesn't it? Feels like a second language I'm finally fluent in. It wasn't all a montage with a soft piano track, of course. Life showed up because it always does. His mother fell in the kitchen on a Monday when he was in aisle 3 asking me about wood putty. And the call came and the rest of the day was a blur of beeping monitors and uncomfortable chairs and the particular air of hospital hallways where time is a flat circle. He sat there, shoulders forward, eyes rimmed with red, and I brought him coffee that wasn't good but was hot. And he took it like one takes a hand, grateful for the contact. "She's sleeping," he said. "They said she'll be okay, but she's changing." "And it's my turn. We take turns," I said. "It's what families do." He looked at me like he was trying on a word that had always been just outside his reach. "Family," he said. Not a question, a test. A promise. I waited until the nurse had spoken in those even tones that nurses have, the ones that can hold both gravity and reassurance. And then I walked him down to the vending machine, and we bought 2 bags of pretzels and sat on a hallway floor. We ate quietly for a minute, the way hunger goes quiet around grief. Finally, he said, "I wish I'd come back sooner." "You came when you could," I said. "We come when we can." "I think that counts." He leaned his forehead against my shoulder. No fireworks, no dramatic swell, just the weight of a person trusting you with their tired. Caleb flew in on a red-eye with a guitar on his back and arms too long for his coat sleeves. He hugged his dad like they had been doing this their whole lives, which they had, through all the versions of themselves. Later, when Evan was with his mother, Caleb sat across from me in the hospital cafeteria and picked at a muffin. "You're Daniel," he said, not a question. "I am," I said, feeling the desire to impress the way you do when someone's child, even a grown one, is looking at you like you might matter. "He's different," Caleb said, searching for a word. "Lighter. In the shoulders. He's happy when he's with you." I swallowed, something gentle and frightening at once. "I'm happy when I'm with him," I said. Caleb nodded, tore the muffin in half, and held out the bigger piece without thinking, the small kindnesses passed along. "He told me about that note he never gave you," he said. "Told me he finally showed you. He's braver now." "He's always been brave," I said. Now he knows it. We made it through. The hospital discharged his mother with a stern instruction to use the walker and accept help. She did, reluctantly for a while until accepting turned into integrating, and she let us put a line of safety strips on the edge of the steps and teased me for measuring twice before cutting once. I told her my dad would haunt me if I didn't. One evening, when the air felt like the first permission slip of fall, Evan showed up at my back door with a canvas bag. "I made chili," he said, proud and slightly apologetic, which is a tone men learn when their cooking has been a journey. "It tastes like tomatoes and hope." We sat at my kitchen table and ate chili that did, in fact, taste like hope, and buttered cornbread on both sides because sometimes indulgence is exactly the right thing. He told me about a contract job he'd been offered out west. "Portland," he said. 6 months. Good money. I could fly back on weekends, or we could talk about what that would be like. I kept eating, because sometimes your hands need something to do so your mouth doesn't say the first scared thing. "What do you want?" I asked him because it matters. "I want both," he said, and then he laughed at the absurdity of the universe. "I want the work and the love. I want to be a good son and a good dad and a good partner. I want to learn when to say no to travel and yes to dinner on a Wednesday. I want to choose a paint color and change my mind about it without it feeling like a moral failing. I want ordinary and honest." "Then let's figure out what that looks like," I said. "I can't pick up the store for half a year. But maybe there's a way to say yes and not leave everything we're building." He looked relieved and terrified, which is exactly how hope looks when it's real. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe I can turn it down. Or maybe I can ask for 3 months, or maybe I can do something reckless like believe it's not the only chance I'll ever get, and that if it is, it's not worth more than you." The word "you" landed between us like a small bird, feet scrambling until it found balance. We let it settle. I reached across the table and took his hand. His fingers were calloused and warm. We'd held hands before, in the truck once when we crossed the street, briefly in the hospital without thinking. This was different. This was a declaration written in touch. "You don't have to choose me over your life," I said, "but I want to be in the choosing if you let me." He nodded, and his eyes went wet but didn't spill. "Okay," he said. "Okay." That night, we did kiss finally in the kitchen crowded with dishes and mismatched coffee mugs. It was brief and soft, like a promise you don't say loud because you want to hear it later in the quiet. Gus sneezed and we both laughed, and that made it even more ours. We met with the contractor on his potential job and he asked good questions. We looked at calendars. We put Post-it notes on the door with ideas that felt wild and simple. He talked to his sister who said, "If you stay, we'll make it work. If you go, we'll make it work. Either way, I want you to be happy." And then she sent a photo of their mother in a ridiculous hat with the caption, "She approves of everything that involves hats." In the end, he asked for 3 months, remote for 2, travel for 1. They said yes. We made a schedule like you make anything that matters, with room for grace. He was gone sometimes and here more often. And when he was gone, we talked like teenagers, the phone warm against my ear, my voice sleepy at midnight as we listened to each other breathing. He sent me photos of sunsets off an unfamiliar river. I sent him photos of Gus falling asleep with a screwdriver under his paw like he hoped to wake up handy. When he was home, we did important small things. He took the terrible old sign off the hardware store that had been threatening to fall and helped me put up a new one with clean lines and good bones. I taught him the difference between a Phillips and a flathead, and he pretended I was the first person ever to explain it well. He taught me to play a G chord without making it sound like a chair leg breaking. We had dinner with my mother on Sundays, where she asked him questions in the way she asks everyone, carefully, respectfully, assuming they have something to teach her. He told her about his work, and she told him about the time she got stuck on the roof because she went up to rescue a wind-blown umbrella and forgot she was afraid of heights. He looked at me across the table like a man watching a home assemble itself around him. We went back to the high school once in October when the marching band was practicing. The kids were all elbows and enthusiasm, and the director was good at the particular magic of turning clatter into something resembling music. We sat on the top row this time, feeling like kings only because the town allowed it, and a kid with a trumpet shouted, "Mr. Harper!" and came over to tell Evan he'd fixed the porch with the new paint. "Summer dawn," he said, proud as an artist. Evan grinned, and I watched the way being useful fit him like a favorite shirt. On a rainy Thursday toward the end of the 3 months, he came to the store just before closing with a look on his face that meant he'd made a decision and was worried it would spill out of his mouth before he could present it properly. I flipped the open sign to closed, locked the door, and leaned my elbows on the counter. "Okay," I said. "Tell me." He set down his hands flat like he needed to steady the words. "They offered to extend," he said. 6 more months. Good money. Interesting projects. But the thing is, they'd need me there. Really there. And I stood in that office thinking about what my life looks like when I'm 90 and the pictures in my house are just sunrises from cities I passed through alone. And I thought about the way your laugh sounds at 7 a.m. when the coffee maker makes that two-tone sigh. I thought about the porch swing we haven't built yet. I thought about Cal's first concert next spring. I thought about my mom's laugh when your mom told her that story about the umbrella. And I said no. He looked terrified, exhilarated, like a man who had just jumped into a lake and surfaced with all the breath in the world. "I said no," he said again, as if making sure it still existed in the air. I walked around the counter and put my hands on his face. "Okay," I said, because it was enough and everything at once. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said, with a grin that said he did, actually. "I just know it's this." "Then let's build it," I said. "We know how." We did build it. Not in a montage. In mornings and evenings and the in-betweens. He started a small business with his name on the side of the truck in letters so clean you could see your future in them. Harper Homeworks, which made us laugh because my last name is Daniels, and we both liked the old-fashioned rhythm of it when said aloud. He hired a kid from the high school who wanted to learn how to fix stair rails and install light fixtures without electrocuting himself. He made house calls with a tool belt and a patient smile. I taught a class at the community center on easy home repairs, half of which devolved into people telling stories about the things they were afraid to fix and how that fear looked like other things in their lives. I saw ways people measure themselves. It made me kinder. It made me braver, too. We did the big thing, too. One Sunday afternoon, we drove out to that road under that big sky and planted a sapling near the fence line. "A maple," he said. "So, in a couple of years, we can come and sit in the shade we gave ourselves." We took turns digging, our bodies honest about their complaints, sweating and laughing and swearing in the soft way you do when no one needs to be impressed. We staked it and watered it and stood back. It looked small and determined, which I think is the most beautiful way to look. Caleb came home for Thanksgiving with a girl named Mia who wore boots that could have walked across 6 states and hair that looked like it had been borrowed from a painting. We all cooked too much, and somehow everything was ready at once. After dinner, we sat in the living room with the football game, murmuring like an old aunt behind us, and Cal pulled out his guitar. He played a quiet song he'd written that sounded like the engine of a truck cooling at midnight, and the cerulean paint of a stage sky and the creak of bleachers that have watched a generation grow up. Halfway through, he looked up and caught both our eyes and smiled, and I felt something in me unclench that had been tightened for years. In December, we hung lights around the eaves of the hardware store that made it look like a small ship moored in a sea of new snow. People came in for tape and found community, as they always do. On Christmas Eve, he leaned in the doorway with a paper cup of cocoa, and I kissed him under the string lights because sometimes cliché is just truth dressed up. We went to visit his mom with a box of fudge that my mother had made, and he'd wrapped with a bow, and we all watched an old holiday movie, the kind where the kiss is at the end and you already know it's coming and still it makes your heart rise. There were hard days, too. Days when business was slow and money was a math problem that stubbornly refused to solve itself. Days when his mother forgot the month and cried because she didn't know why she was crying. Days when I said the wrong thing and he forgot to say the right one. But we were 40 and we knew that hard is normal. Instead of saying, "This must mean it's broken," we said, "This must mean it's Thursday," and we made soup. In March, we finally built the porch swing. It took longer than it should have, because we got distracted telling stories on the steps. But when we hung it and it held, we sat on it like men who had earned something. We pushed off gently and watched the street. A neighbor waved. Somewhere a dog barked like a doorbell. I can feel time, he said, but it doesn't scare me now. He squeezed my hand once, like you do when your heart wants to touch someone and your hand volunteers. Spring came with that miracle where trees remember their lines. Our maple out on the road unfurled its first leaves, brave and small. We drove out to see it because you visit the things you plant as often as you can. We sat on the truck hood again, older and not pretending otherwise, and I said, "It's funny, isn't it? How the things you don't do at 18 find you at 40 and say, 'You ready now?'" He laughed. We had to let ourselves catch up to ourselves. We drove home slowly. In the mirror, the maple was a dot of green, a promise we could locate even without GPS, because some things are mapped on the inside of your chest. One night in June, the air soft as an apology, we went to the old theater. A younger director had taken over and was doing a revival of the sort of small-town play that isn't perfect, but is true. I wandered backstage during intermission, touching flat after flat, time collapsing into the way paint smells regardless of the year. He stood next to me and ran his fingertips over the sky, now a different blue, and said, "I'm glad you never stopped making scenes." "I just learned to live them," I said, and slid my fingers through his. Neither of us let go. After the show, we walked down the alley behind the theater like we had once 100 years ago. We stopped at the spot where people used to take smoke breaks and share secrets. We stood there in the quiet glow of the exit sign. He said, "I want to say it," and looked at me, just looked, like a man who knows what he's about. "I love you," he said. The words didn't echo because the night didn't need them to. They settled. They warmed. "I love you," I said. It felt like putting a blade of grass between my thumbs and blowing, coaxing a true note out of something humble. He kissed my forehead. Then my mouth and the alley didn't become Paris. But it did become exactly where I wanted to be. We walked home, and in the morning, nothing and everything had changed. The coffee tasted like coffee. The paper was thin and crinkled. Gus demanded his breakfast by banging his bowl against the wall like a tiny drummer. We fed him and the day. 1 year after that first night under the paint colors, we celebrated with the sort of party that small towns understand how to host. The diner closed early and we ate pie in the afternoon. Because why not? The marching band kids, now a little taller, came and played 3 songs on our back lawn, including a wobbly version of a classic that still made the hair on my arms stand up. My mother and his mother sat in the shade under a canopy, and when she got tired, we brought the party to her with stories and photographs and the smile you share when you recognize someone you love in the face of someone they love. He gave me a gift wrapped in brown paper and twine, a frame with that old note behind glass. He'd made a copy and kept the original folded in his wallet where it had lived all those years. Under the note he'd stenciled, "We found the road." I gave him a small carved maple leaf, sanded smooth, and said, "We planted this for our future selves." We stood there in the late light of summer and watched the people we'd somehow gathered around us, neighbors and kids and parents, and the mail carrier who always has a joke, be themselves. That's what love did for me at 40. It didn't make my life unrecognizable. It made it more itself. It taught me to stop waiting in the bleachers, to stand and walk toward the person who had become the place I wanted to stay. Sometimes, late after we've turned off the lights and washed the last dish and checked the door twice, he will lie there with his arm across my chest and say, "I wish I could tell that kid in the jersey to relax." I say, "I wish I could tell that boy with paint on his jeans to put down the brush and go ask for a ride." We are both grateful no one did. We drive out to the maple in all seasons. In the fall, when the leaves burn from the tips inward like a fuse in reverse, we bring a thermos of coffee and sit on an old blanket. In winter, we check the branch tips for buds like whoever planted us knew what they were doing. In spring, we admire the new leaves like proud parents. In summer, we sit in the shade we've grown, and sometimes a second truck pulls off the highway and a couple gets out and they walk over, and we all say nothing much, and it means everything. We've never asked, but I like to imagine their stories. I like to imagine their notes, tucked and kept, pulled out and shown when ready. I still run the hardware store. He still fixes the stubborn things in people's houses and lives. Cal still calls with songs and news about gigs, his voice even deeper now, his laugh much like his dad's, the DNA of joy. Our mothers take turns being the wise one and the one who needs help, reshuffling the deck every week because that's how you keep from losing. Gus sleeps more, chases less, loves us with the loyalty that is both a grace and a promise we make back. Sometimes in the late afternoon, Evan will wander into the store with 2 lemonades and stand beside me at the counter while I count bolts. He'll tease me about the way I count slowly, and I'll tease him about the way he leaves a pencil behind in every room he enters, like a trail of breadcrumbs for a man who has decided to stay. Sometimes a customer will ask, kindly and without nosiness, "How'd you two meet?" And we'll look at each other and grin and say, "High school," because it's true, and also not the whole story. The whole story is this. We met when we became the people who could meet. We met when we were ready to carry each other's ordinary and make it home. If you ask about the moment the future felt young again, I could point to that day in the hardware store when my name sounded like a secret, and to the night under the sky when wanting became a kind of permission. But I think it happened 100 times after that, in the way the dishwasher hums like a lullaby and the way he hands me the screwdriver, handle first, like trust. In the way we say goodnight even when we're going to the same bed, and the way we say good morning like it's a surprise we still deserve. At 40, my high school crush walked back into my life, and it was not a movie with swelling strings and a montage of makeovers. It was better. It was the slow, faithful work of love. The kind that learns your grocery list and your way of folding towels, your stubbornness, and your soft. It was patience. It was permission. It was pie on Wednesdays, and porch swings in March, and a maple in a field teaching us that shade is something you grow with time. Sometimes, when the light falls just so on his profile as he reads, glasses low on his nose because he refuses to admit he needs them more than he did last year, I will feel 18 and 40 and every age in between, and I'll ask, "How did we get here?" He'll say, "We kept showing up," and that will be the truest thing in the room. And on the days when the world is too much, when the headlines are sharp and the day is long, we will walk to the park at dusk with Gus and sit on the bench. And the cicadas will hold court, and I will lean into the person who is my place. At 40, we're young again, not because we went back, but because we went forward together. The paint at the store changes with the seasons. The porch swing creaks, the maple grows, and somewhere out on the 2-lane road, the sky waits for us like it always has. Wide and forgiving, ready each time we arrive.